Hey, if you have your Bibles, I'd like to invite you to find Isaiah chapter 9. And also, by the by, I think we do have some stuff. So Shania is kind of helping cover things for our preschoolers. So if we have preschoolers here, I think they're already making their way out. So they kind of cued me on that. If you have your Bibles, Isaiah chapter 9. Every now and again, you get things going so much in different directions. I know that I left my office with my Bible, but it didn't seem to make it here. But thankfully, we've been looking at one verse for a while, so if I don't have it memorized by now, then I'm in bad shape, okay? But find Isaiah chapter 9 and verse 6. If you want to just kind of leave that lay open, that would be fine. And I'm going to visit just a little bit with you and tell you a little bit about one of England's earliest kings that we know of, and England being kind of the England that we know. Of all the early kings of England, at least that's the way Paul Harvey described it, he said, this king might have been the best loved and most respected. But we don't really have much that we know about him because it's like history's kind of forgotten him. What we do know would be that he reigned as king in the 3rd century. We also know that he ascended to the throne upon the death of Asclepiad. I figure you all probably knew that, but anyhow, Asclepiad. We know that this good king, that it was his good nature that had a soothing effect on the people at a time that was really pretty savage. We know that his daughter was a skilled musician, and we know not a lot else. Somehow, history has forgotten a lot of this good king. And what remains that we have to work from as far as to know is an earthwork amphitheater there in Colchester, England. We have a couple of references from some ancient writers. There's Geoffrey from Monmouth. I'm sure you've heard of him. There's also Robert of Gloucester. They both have made mention of this good king. Oh, and there's a few verses that were written about this king. Geoffrey of Monmouth and Robert of Gloucester talk about this particular king was known for being very even-tempered. He was also very capable. We know that he had a good humor and that there was something very rare about him, and that is in an age and a time where rulers were corrupt and ruthless and brutal, he was kind, even-tempered. He was so well respected that they actually made historical note of his daughter and her ability to play music. That was very rare. And other than that, we don't have a whole lot about this good king of England, except for a couple of verses that were written about him. We don't know if it was written by someone in his court or in his direct service. It may have been a man or a woman on the street. We don't know. But while most of us probably don't remember or don't recall this good king, we might just remember the verses that were written about him. Do you know him? No. Good guess. Old King Cole was a merry old soul. And a merry old soul was he. And he called for his pipe, called for his bowl, and he called for his fiddlers 3. The good King Cole. And I don't know where I even learned that little ditty, but I did, and it stuck with me, and I thought, isn't that interesting? About a king I never knew about. But somehow, even with the king who reigned in the 3rd century, we still have a little rhyme and verse and tune that reminds us of this good king. It's kind of a good story, isn't it? As I was reading about that and reading about old King Cole, it occurred to me, a couple of centuries before that, there was a good king, and there were verses written about him, and verses that we sing to this day, right? Following me? We just sang several verses about the good king born to us. He was not just born a couple of centuries before old King Cole. He was promised several centuries before that. Fix that in your mind. Old King Cole, the merry old soul, reigned in the 3rd century, but in the 1st century, a child was born who would be the good king. And 700 years before he was born, he was promised explicitly by a number of different writers moved by God. And one of those writers was Isaiah. And Isaiah looked And in chapter 9, he sees that those who sit in the darkness will see a great light, and those who are in shadowy places, the light has come to them. And then he says, for unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Did I get it right? Close enough. And the government will be upon his shoulders. There you go. And his name will be called. There you go. Isaiah 9. We've been working through these titles of Jesus. There's 4 of them, and they each have 2 parts, right? There's the title itself, and then there's kind of the qualifier or the modifier, if you want to put it that way, right? So the one who's promised in Isaiah will be the counselor. Of what sort? What kind of counselor will he be? Wonderful Counselor. And he's God. What kind of God? Mighty God. And he's Father. What kind of Father? The everlasting kind. And he's Prince. What kind? Peaceful kind. What we've done with that is we've just looked at what the names and the titles mean, and maybe what they mean to us. And we come to the 4th of those titles, which is the Prince of Peace. So let's just jump on in, shall we? He shall be called Prince. Where are we going with that? And what does that mean? I think we all have a pretty good idea in terms of prince, but basically let's spell it out, shall we? Princes come to rule. Okay? That's the point. The government will be on his shoulders. So this is one that we say, that they say, he is going to be prince. And this, I think, is the most challenging title of the 4. That the one promised is going to be the Prince of Peace. And sometimes we wonder, well, what's the challenge of that? Well, let's take a look and think about what a prince is and does. Let's press into that a little bit more, shall we? A prince is the one who draws the consciousness of the community. Any Disney people here? Any people like Disney? 4, 6, 8, come on, you can admit. You can check almost any kind of Disney movie, and you will find that those Disney movies that have a prince, guess what everyone's aware of? The prince. Cinderella? What's the big buzz around the kingdom? Who will the prince choose to marry, right? And everything's buzzing around the prince. He's the one that draws the consciousness of the people. He's the one that everyone's aware of. What about Bambi? Bambi? Anyone? I know it's kind of a sad movie, but how do all the little wood animals or forest animals, there you go, wood animals. How do the forest animals react and greet Bambi, remember? Good morning, great prince or young prince, meaning everyone's aware of who the prince is. The prince draws the consciousness of everyone around them. He draws the consciousness of all the people. It's the way princes are. It's what they do. It's not necessarily an ego trip. It's just the way it works. The one born is going to be a prince, meaning he will be the one that draws the consciousness of the people. Dallas Willard talks about God's dream. And he suggests that God's dream is that of creating a people of loving persons. A kingdom of loving persons with himself as the source and its most glorious inhabitant. And that's really the image of heaven, by the by. A gathering of loving persons with God as the source and the most glorious inhabitant. The prince is the glorious inhabitant, and the child promised born is the prince, the most glorious inhabitant. See why that's a challenge? It sounds nice, but I think it's a challenge because of this. It makes me pause and ask, Barn, who's the most glorious inhabitant in your life? Who's the most glorious inhabitant in my life? In your life? Oh, I pray to God it's not your TV set. I pray to God it's not that grudge you've carried, and that's the most glorious inhabitant in your life. You know, I've done a lot of work with a lot of teenagers and high schoolers, middle schoolers, and I pray to God that the most glorious inhabitant in their life isn't their boyfriend or their girlfriend. I pray that the most glorious inhabitant in our life would be the one who's the prince, who draws my consciousness to him, that he is the most glorious inhabitant in my life. Who's the most glorious inhabitant in your life, really? Anything less than the prince, and you're set up for disappointment. I'm still on like the first sub-point of my first point. I'm going to move on. Here's another thing that princes are or do. Because they're the ones that draw the consciousness of the people, listen, the prince defines the culture. Anyone here follow national elections at all? You know what's interesting? Every presidential cycle, there are those that upon the presidential cycle identify or announce, and sometimes you'll see it even in list form, of what's in and what's out. They understand the election to be a statement about culture, that these are the things that are in now because of this person who has been elected and placed in office. And these are the things that are out now because of the person who has either left office or, again, because of the person who's been placed in office. You following me? So, a number of years ago, when Mr. Bush was elected to president, GW, the big list was, cowboy boots are in, Western music is in, and on and on. These are the things that are in. Why? Because they understood from that election that this was now defining the culture and would define the culture for a time because this was the person in power. You follow me now? With each election, when there is a change, a lot of times different culture watchers will put forward, this is what's in and this is what's out. Meaning, the person who holds power and influence helps to define the culture, for good or for bad. The one who's born is a prince. He defines the culture. He determines what's in and what's out. So what does that look like? See why that's challenging? If Jesus is the Prince of Peace, and He is the one, therefore, that not only draws the awareness and consciousness of His people, but He's also the one that defines the culture, then that means certain things are in and certain things are out of that culture. You follow? Serving is in. Selfishness is out. Right? He's defining the culture. Jesus is. This is what's in. Serving. Here's what's out. Selfishness. Here's what's in. Forgiving. Here's what's out. Grudge carrying. It's out. Here's what's in. Heartfelt worship. Here's what's out. Spiritual indifference. You see? He's defining the culture. Here's what's in. Grace is in. Here's what's out. Harsh judgment is out. He's defining the culture of how things are done and how we are with each other. And He's defining it because He's the Prince. What's defining the culture of your life? You see the challenge? What's defining what's in and what's out in the culture of your life? I have to ask that question for myself. I need to ask it of you. We have to define. The Prince of Peace defines the culture. There's one more. The Prince determines the direction. He's the face of the leadership. He's the face of the culture. He makes the decisions. He gives the directions. He gives the instructions on the way in which we are supposed to go. That's what princes do. They direct the course. They give the instruction. They give the direction. They say, this is where this needs to go. Princes lead. The child promised is a prince. I was laughing with Mel a little bit this week. I said, a friend of mine once said, we keep thinking that Jesus came just to take our side. No, He came to take over. That's what princes do. They lead. The government will be on His shoulder, meaning what? He calls the shots. He sets the direction. He creates the course. That's what princes do. Do you see the challenge? Who leads in my life? Really? Who sets the course? Who makes the direction? Here's the challenge. Who leads, really, in your life? Really, who leads? I think this one is kind of the one that kind of parts the waters. And here's why. Because I think that there are those who think of Jesus in sentimental terms. Tender Jesus, meek and mild. And He's kind of here to make me feel good. But I don't do the things that are important to Him. I don't take the paths that He instructs me to take. You know what that means? It means we've made Jesus into old King Cole, where we sing a little tune about Him, but He has no real bearing on my life. But if He's a Prince of Peace, then the challenge is for Him to have functional leadership in my life. We face a time, and I'm sure every time has their own, but I think we face the time of what I will call the Facebookization of faith. And you know what that is? The Facebookization of life and of faith is this. Sometimes I see folks and they post wonderful little posters about God and Jesus on their Facebook page. Anyone see those? I mean, they're very good and they're very nice. But sometimes these things come and are posted by folks that I know don't worship with his people. They're posted sometimes by folks that I know don't serve or invest in anyone else's life. They're posted by folks who don't give, they don't forgive, they're not faithful, they don't grow, they don't learn, they don't pray. And I'm thinking, all you're doing is posting a nice poster, but if we think that that is really his functional leadership, let me clue you in. Posters are really nice, but that's not our primary calling, is to post good things on Facebook. The primary calling we have is to come under his functional leadership. I will build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Okay, but I'm not interested in going. Huh? God so loved the world, he gave his only son. It's okay, but I'm not giving. Son of Man came not to be served, but to be served. That's fine, but I'm not serving. He poured out his life to death to redeem and to change lives. That's okay, but I'm not investing in anybody. We are not fooling anybody. If we sing his praises, so to speak, on Facebook, but we don't live under his functional leadership, what are we doing? You see the challenge? He's the prince. Princes have come not just to be sentimental figures. They've come to lead. What exercises or who exercises functional leadership in your life? The way your life really works. That's a challenging question. This is the person who's promised he's going to be a prince. You see why it's so challenging now? But he's going to be a prince of a certain variety, right? Oh, the bruised reed he's not going to break, right? And the barely smoldering fire he will not extinguish. He's gentle. He leads to peace. I think that when it comes to leadership, it's good to have an idea of where you're being led. You with me on this? In Indiana, so I'm told, there is a tombstone that has, in a cemetery that had, let me see if I can get this right, this inscription: "Pause, O stranger, as you pass me by, for as you are, so once was I, and as I am, you will one day be. So prepare for death and follow me." It's kind of a sobering little poem, isn't it? And apparently the story goes that someone was rather clever and creative, so they put a little addition onto that grave marker. And the addition they put was this: "To follow you, I am not content until I know which way you went." The one who comes as a prince, we're told he's the Prince of Peace. He leads us to shalom, to a life that's oriented and arranged and experienced as it should be. A different kind of life now, an eternal kind of life then. That's where he leads us. We have folks in this church who are part of the healthcare profession, and you can tell everyone, and the people will tell you, health is more than just the absence of being sick. Peace is more than the absence of conflict. It's the idea of wholeness, fullness, and life as it really should be. And that's where the Prince leads us, the Prince of Peace. And that's the person that's been promised. That's the title he's worthy to bear. Now we have to switch it around and say, so what's the promise for us in that person? And here's what I think it is. I think the promise that's tied in for that person, the promise that he brings to us, is harmony. Harmony is where things fit together as they should. Harmony. What we're told is that Jesus, the Prince of Peace, leads to putting things right and as they should be with me and God. Where, if you want to put it that way, where that struggle is done, there is an enormous release and an enormous peace that comes when I deeply decide that argument is over, that he is God and I am not, and I'm not going to wrestle against it anymore. There are a lot of people and a number of folks here that still know that struggle. We have this ongoing argument with God about who's going to be God. But there is listen to me, there is enormous peace that comes. A quality of harmony that comes to life when I stop that struggle and I say, you are God and I am not. Harmony comes when in my exchange with you, I stop competing with you. Man, there's some competitive people around. And you know what I've noticed about really competitive people? They're rarely happy. There's not really a quality of peace in their life. And you realize, you know what? That's because they're in constant competition with everybody. Great peace comes when we say, I don't need to live in competition with everybody. I don't need to see you as my competitor for anything. We can be brothers and sisters now because I don't have to compete with you for anything. The peace, the harmony that Jesus brings to us is the harmony that comes from my, how am I going to put this, restlessness, looking for that something that I can't seem to find. Anyone know that feeling? Jen and I have these conversations all the time, and I don't know why this is, but I look back on my life, and about every 4 to 5 years, it's like something big had to change. Some sort of big thing had to change. So I had to do this or take this path, or hey, we moved here or moved there. All sorts of stuff. And I look back and it's like, you know what? Like every 4 years, there's some sort of big to-do that has to happen with me. And I thought, what's that about? And I got to talking with some folks, and I thought there was 2 things about it. Number one is, from earliest life, this is just autobiographical here, but from earliest life, it was like big changes came when I was 4. You know, big changes came when I was 7. Big changes came when I was 11. And it was like about every 4 years. And then I realized, you know what? I kind of got patterned that way. But the other part of it is the truth. There was a restlessness that I kept thinking would get filled somehow on the inside by changing the outside. But it was Augustine who said, our hearts will always be restless until they find their rest in you. That's harmony. And the last part of that Jesus brings in terms of harmony is this. Harmony comes is all good. Well, let me just say this. Here's the thing I figured out at church and weddings and every gathering you have. Kids don't stop being kids. And it's okay. Now, that having been said, there's a harmony that comes when my inside lines up with my outside. Or maybe it's the other way, where my outside starts to line up with my inside. Where what I say is important, I treat as important. Where the way that I appear is actually the way I am. And that's life. That's a unified life. And there's harmony in that. Child is born, son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. What government? What government? What about the government of me? The government of my life can rest on his shoulders because he's the Prince of Peace and he's the everlasting Father. He's the mighty God. He's the wonderful Counselor. I can trust the government of my life to his shoulders and no one else's. His shoulders are strong enough to bear it, and he's reliable enough for me to trust it to him. He's the Prince of Peace.